The dim fluorescent lights of Mercy General Hospital flickered like dying stars, casting long shadows across the sterile corridors. It was well past midnight, the kind of hour when the world outside blurred into a haze of rain-slicked streets and distant thunder. Nurse Elena Ramirez hurried down the hallway, her scrubs stained with the day's battles, coffee spills from endless shifts, faint traces of antiseptic that never quite washed out. At 35, Elena carried the weight of her vows not just on her ring finger, but in the quiet steel of her resolve. She had married into a life most would fear, the president of the Iron Vipers, a motorcycle club forged in the fires of old wars and unbreakable promises. But here, in this place of healing, she was just Elena, the steady hand that mended the broken. The elevator doors slid open with a mechanical sigh, revealing the basement level, a forgotten underbelly of the hospital where storage rooms overflowed with outdated equipment, and the air hung heavy with the scent of damp concrete and rust. Elena clutched a clipboard, tasked with retrieving emergency supplies for an incoming trauma case. Her footsteps echoed softly, the only sound breaking the oppressive silence. That's when she heard it. A low, authoritative voice, laced with impatience, barking orders from around the corner. "Move it! I don't have all night for this nonsense." The words belonged to Victor Hale, the hospital's CEO, a man whose tailored suit and polished shoes screamed boardroom power, not bedside compassion. Hale had clawed his way to the top through cutthroat deals and whispered alliances, turning Mercy General into a profit machine at the expense of its soul. Nurses whispered about his temper, how he'd bully staff into silence, covering up shortages and scandals to keep the donors happy. Tonight, his target was Elena. She rounded the bend and froze. Hale had cornered a young orderly, shoving him against a stack of crates. The kid's face was pale, eyes wide with fear, as Hale loomed over him, fist clenched. "You think you can slack off on my watch? This hospital runs on my dime." The orderly stammered an apology, but Hale wasn't listening. In a flash, he grabbed the kid's collar and dragged him toward a side door, the one leading to the maintenance tunnels. Dark, narrow passages rarely patrolled. Elena's heart pounded. She stepped forward, her voice steady despite the chill racing up her spine. "Mr. Hale, stop! He's just doing his job. Let him go." The CEO whirled, his eyes narrowing at the interruption. Recognition flickered. Elena, the reliable night shift nurse, always too outspoken for his liking. But tonight, something darker brewed in his gaze. Fueled by a bad day of investor calls and mounting debts he hid from the board. "You? Stay out of this, Ramirez. This doesn't concern you." He released the orderly with a shove, the kid scrambling away into the shadows. But Hale's attention locked on Elena. She stood her ground, chin lifted, the faint scent of her husband's leather jacket still clinging to her skin from the goodnight kiss hours earlier. Hale advanced, his breath hot with expensive cologne and barely contained rage. "You've been a thorn in my side too long, questioning orders, stirring up trouble with the union. Time you learned your place." Before she could react, Hale's hand shot out, gripping her arm with bruising force. Eleanor gasped, the clipboard clattering to the floor as he yanked her toward the same side door. The basement air grew thicker, the distant hum of generators vibrating through the walls like a warning. "What are you? Let go!" she protested, twisting against his hold, but Hale was stronger, driven by a bully's delusion of control. He dragged her into the dim tunnel, the door slamming shut behind them with a finality that echoed like a gavel. Inside, the space was a labyrinth of pipes and flickering emergency lights, the air musty and cold, carrying the faint tang of mildew. Hale shoved her against the wall, his face inches from hers, veins bulging in his neck. "You think you're untouchable. I'll make sure you're gone by morning, fired, blacklisted, whatever it takes. No one crosses Victor Hale." Elena's mind raced, not with fear for herself, but for the patients upstairs who depended on her and the life she guarded fiercely outside these walls. She thought of Marcus, her husband, the Iron Viper's president, a man whose scars from desert sands and lost brothers ran deeper than any wound she tended. He had promised her safety, a quiet life amid the roar of engines, but promises like theirs were forged in fire, unbreakable even in the dark. Upstairs, the orderly burst into the nurse's station, breathless and trembling. "Call someone! Hale's lost it!" He took Nurse Ramirez down to the basement. Whispers spread like wildfire through the night shift, phones buzzing in hushed urgency. But who to call? The police? In a town where Hale's influence reached every corner, from City Hall to the local precinct, trust was a fragile thing. One nurse, an older woman with greying hair and a no-nonsense gaze, hesitated before dialing a number not listed in any hospital directory. It rang twice before a gravelly voice answered on the other end. "Yeah?" It was Jax, Marcus's right-hand man, the club's enforcer with a tattooed forearm that told stories of loyalty etched in ink. The nurse's voice cracked as she explained, piecing together the horror unfolding below. Jax's response was immediate, a low growl that promised retribution without a word wasted. "We're coming. Tell her to hold on." Miles away, in a dimly lit garage on the outskirts of town, the Iron Viper's clubhouse thrummed with the low murmur of late-night card games and the clink of beer bottles. Marcus Kane sat at the bar, nursing a whiskey, his broad shoulders hunched under the weight of old ghosts. At 42, he was a mountain of a man, his face weathered by sun and sorrow, a faded patch on his vest reading President in stitched defiance. The club wasn't just bikes and brotherhood. It was a covenant born from a battlefield promise decades ago. Never leave a brother behind. Extend that to the innocent. Elena was his anchor, the light that pulled him from the abyss after losing his first family to a senseless accident years back. His phone buzzed, Jax's name flashing on the screen. Marcus answered, and the words hit like a punch to the gut. "Elena's in trouble. Hospital CEO's got her cornered in some basement. Sounds bad." The glass shattered in Marcus's grip, shards embedding in his palm. But he felt no pain, only the cold fire of purpose igniting. He stood, the stool scraping against the concrete floor, and the room fell silent as eyes turned to him. "Vipers, gear up. We ride for Elena. Now." Sirens weren't needed. The thunder of engines would announce them soon enough. 20 bikes roared to life in the garage, headlights piercing the night like avenging stars. Marcus led the pack, his mind flashing to the vow he'd made under a desert moon. Protect what's yours, no matter the cost. Hale had no idea the storm he'd unleashed. A convoy of leather-clad guardians, bound by blood and honor, tearing through the rain toward Mercy General. As the first drops pelted the windshield of Hale's waiting car outside the hospital, he released Elena with a sneer, oblivious to the distant rumble growing on the horizon. "Consider this your warning," he spat, straightening his tie. But Elena's eyes, sharp and unyielding, held a secret fire. She straightened her scrubs, rubbing her arm where bruises would bloom, and whispered to herself, "You just made the biggest mistake of your life." The ground trembled faintly as the bikes crested the hill, a silhouette of justice rolling in like dawn's reckoning. In that moment, amid the storm's howl, an old promise stirred to life, one that would bind the Vipers in a ride for redemption, loyalty, and the moral justice that no corner office could corrupt. The rain hammered the hospital's roof like a relentless drumbeat, turning the parking lot into a slick mirror of sodium lights and blurred reflections. Victor Hale stormed out of the basement tunnel, his polished loafers splashing through shallow puddles as he made for his sleek black sedan. The altercation with Elena lingered in his mind like a bad aftertaste, another loose end in a day full of them. Investors breathing down his neck, Board members questioning the latest round of efficiency cuts that left wards understaffed and patients waiting. He needed control, and that nurse had dared to challenge it. A smirk tugged at his lips as he slid into the driver's seat, the leather creaking under his weight. She'd be dealt with, quietly, permanently. Mercy General was his kingdom, and thorns like her got pruned. Inside the hospital, Eleanor emerged from the shadows of the tunnel, her breath steadying as she leaned against the cool wall for a moment. The faint ache in her arm was nothing compared to the fire in her chest. She wasn't one to crumble. Years of stitching wounds and holding hands through the night had forged her tougher than steel. But this crossed a line into something personal. A violation that echoed the old scars Marcus carried from his days in the sand-swept wars. She pulled out her phone, fingers trembling just enough to notice, and sent a quick text to the one number that meant safety. "I'm okay. Coming up." No details. Jax would fill in the gaps. The Vipers didn't need coddling, they needed action, and she trusted them to deliver. Upstairs, the nurse's station buzzed with controlled chaos. The older nurse, Clara, paced with her phone still clutched in her hand, her face etched with lines of quiet fury. "They said they're on their way," she murmured to the cluster of staff huddled around the desk. Whispers rippled, stories of Hale's tempers, the way he'd buried complaints under layers of paperwork and threats. But tonight felt different, heavier, like the air before a storm breaks. The orderly, still shaken, nodded toward the elevators. "She'll be fine. Elena's tough." Yet doubt lingered. In a place where healing was the promise, betrayal cut deepest. Outside, the distant rumble grew into a symphony of thunder on two wheels. Marcus Kane throttled his Harley, the engine's growl vibrating through his bones like an old friend's call to arms. Rain lashed his face, mixing with the sting of wind, but he didn't flinch. Behind him, the Iron Vipers stretched out in formation, 20 strong, their headlights cutting through the downpour like blades of light. Jax rode shotgun on Marcus's flank, his massive frame hunched low, eyes scanning the road ahead. The club wasn't just riders. They were a brotherhood sealed by a promise made under a blood-red sky in a forgotten desert. "No one left behind," Marcus had sworn to his fallen comrades, and that oath extended to Eleanor, the woman who'd pulled him from his own darkness after the accident that stole his first family. She was the quiet force that kept the demons at bay, her laughter a balm against the roar of regrets. As they crested the final hill, the hospital loomed, a monolithic glow against the stormy night. Marcus signaled with a gloved fist, and the convoy split seamlessly, half-circling the lot to block exits, the rest pulling up to the main entrance in a wall of chrome and leather, engines cut off one by one, the sudden silence amplifying the rain's patter and the faint wail of an ambulance in the distance. Marcus dismounted first, his boots hitting the wet asphalt with a splash. Water streamed from his beard, but his gaze was steel, fixed on the glass doors. "Jax, with me, rest of you, eyes open. No one in or out till we know she's safe." The lobby doors swung open under the push of determined shoulders, drawing stares from the night shift skeleton crew. A security guard straightened, hand hovering near his radio, but one look at the wall of bikers, vests patched with the coiled Viper emblem, faces set like granite, made him think twice. Marcus strode forward, ignoring the wide-eyed receptionist. "Nurse Elena Ramirez, where is she?" His voice was low, gravel wrapped in authority, carrying the weight of unspoken threats. Clara appeared from the hallway, her relief palpable as she waved them toward the elevators. "Basement's clear now. Hale dragged her down there, but she's coming up. Said something about a warning, grabbed her arm rough, left marks." Marcus's jaw tightened, a flicker of rage crossing his features before he reined it in. Marks. The word alone stirred the old promise, the one that demanded justice not through fists, but through the unyielding truth of loyalty. He nodded to Clara. "Thank you. You did right calling." The elevator dinged, and there she was, Elena stepping out with her head high, scrubs disheveled but spirit unbroken. Their eyes met across the space, a silent exchange that spoke volumes. "I'm here. We're whole." She crossed to him in 3 strides, folding into his embrace without a word. The scent of rain and engine oil clung to him, grounding her like an anchor. "Victor Hale," she murmured against his chest, pulling back just enough to meet his gaze. "CEO. He's been squeezing the hospital dry." Cuts to staff, ignoring complaints. "Tonight," he snapped. Marcus's hand rested gently on her arm, thumb brushing the budding bruise with a tenderness that belied his size. "He'll answer for it." Not a threat, but a vow, laced with the moral certainty that had bound the Vipers through trials unseen. Jax cleared his throat, glancing at the growing cluster of staff. "We need to talk to this Hale, quietly." But quiet wasn't in the cards. Outside, Hale's sedan peeled out of the lot, tires screeching on wet pavement as he fled the scene, oblivious to the eyes tracking him. One Viper, perched on his bike, noted the plate with a subtle nod to Marcus. "Got him! Black Lincoln heading south on Route 9. Marcus's mind raced, not to chase, but to plan. Hale's power came from shadows, connections in City Hall, donations that bought silence. But the Vipers had their own network, woven from ex-soldiers, mechanics, and everyday folks who'd known the sting of injustice. They'd uncover the rot, expose it to the light of truth. Elena squeezed Marcus's hand. "The hospital needs this. Patients suffer because of him. Short supplies, overworked shifts. If we push right, we can force change." Her words carried the essence of their shared life, redemption not in vengeance, but in restoring what was broken. Marcus nodded, the rain easing to a drizzle as if the storm itself yielded. "Then we ride for that. For the promise." The Brotherhood murmured agreement, a chosen family rallying around the unspoken code. Honor the vulnerable, stand against the corrupt. As dawn's first grey light crept over the horizon, tinting the wet streets in silver, the Vipers mounted up once more. Hale's car vanished into the distance, but the pursuit had begun. Not with speed, but with the steady grind of justice. In the quiet aftermath, Elena watched them go, a quiet smile breaking through. The basement shadows had tested her, but the light of loyalty shone brighter. And in that fragile peace, an old promise whispered of greater battles ahead, where moral fire would forge paths through the darkest corridors. The first rays of dawn sliced through the thinning clouds, painting the rain-washed streets in hues of pale gold and lingering shadow. Marcus Kane gripped the handlebars of his Harley, the engine's idle purr, a steady heartbeat beneath him as the Iron Vipers formed up in the hospital parking lot. Elena stood at the entrance, her silhouette framed by the glass doors, watching with eyes that held a mix of resolve and quiet worry. The bruise on her arm was hidden now under her sleeve, but the memory of Hale's grip lingered like a ghost in the crisp morning air. She raised a hand in farewell, her wedding band catching the light, a simple circle of silver that symbolized vows deeper than any contract. Marcus nodded once, a silent assurance passing between them before twisting the throttle. The convoy roared to life, a thunderous wave rolling out onto Route 9, tires humming against the damp asphalt. Jax rode close, his bike's chrome gleaming like a blade, while the others fanned out in a protective V formation. The scent of wet earth and exhaust mingled in the breeze, carrying them south toward the city's industrial sprawl. Hale's sedan had a head start, but the Vipers knew these roads like the veins in their own hands, back routes forged from years of midnight runs and heartfelt errands. This wasn't a chase born of rage. It was a measured pursuit, guided by the club's ancient code. Uncover the truth, protect the innocent, honor the promise. As they crested a low rise, the urban horizon unfolded, smokestacks belching faint steam, warehouses huddled like forgotten sentinels under the awakening sky. Marcus's mind churned with fragments of Elena's words from the night before. Hale's cuts to supplies, the way he'd silenced complaints with veiled threats, turning a place of mercy into a ledger of losses. It echoed too closely to the betrayals Marcus had witnessed in distant sands, where leaders profited from the suffering of their own. The Vipers weren't vigilantes, they were guardians, bound by a battlefield oath to stand for those the system overlooked. "Eyes sharp," Marcus called over the wind, his voice cutting through the roar. "We're not here to drag him into the dirt, we're here to drag the dirt into the light." Jax nodded, his tattooed knuckles whitening on the grips. He'd lost a brother to a corrupt contractor back home, a man who'd skimmed safety gear from a construction site, leaving steel beams to buckle under weight they couldn't bear. That promise, to never let greed claim another life, drove him now, fueling the steady thrum of the bikes. The group split at a fork, half veering toward the old mill district, where Hale's known associates lurked, the others sticking to the main artery. Radios crackled faintly under helmets, sharing sightings. A black Lincoln glimpsed at a traffic light, weaving erratically, as if its driver sensed the net closing. Miles ahead, Victor Hale gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles pale against the dark leather. The sedan's interior smelled of stale coffee and the faint, acrid tang of sweat-borne anxiety. He'd meant to teach that nurse a lesson, nothing more, a shove, a warning to keep her mouth shut about the efficiencies that padded his pockets. But as the city lights gave way to the gritty edges of town, doubt gnawed at him. The hospital board meeting loomed at noon, questions about missing funds and patient complaints he couldn't afford to answer. He needed allies, fast. Councilman Reyes, perhaps, the one who'd turned a blind eye to the skimmed donations in exchange for campaign cash. Hale's phone buzzed on the passenger seat. A text from his assistant. "Board's asking about the night shift incident. Police notified." He cursed under his breath, accelerating through a yellow light, oblivious to the distant growl echoing from side streets. Back with the convoy, Marcus signaled a pull-off at a roadside diner, its neon sign flickering like a weary beacon. The Vipers dismounted, boots crunching on gravel as steam rose from cooling engines. Inside, the air was thick with the aroma of frying bacon and fresh coffee, a brief haven amid the hunt. Clara had texted coordinates from the hospital, a lead on Hale's weekend retreat, a lakeside cabin where deals were sealed away from prying eyes, but Marcus paused at the counter, his broad frame casting a long shadow over the worn formica. An older Viper, Tommy, a mechanic with grease-stained hands and a limp from old shrapnel, slid a mug his way. "This Hale, he's got friends in high places. We push too hard, might stir up the wrong hornets." Marcus sipped the bitter brew, the heat grounding him. Tommy spoke truth. The club's history was littered with clashes against badge-wearing corruption, times when a simple ride for justice tangled with red tape and retaliation. Elena's face flashed in his mind, her steady gaze in the basement's dim glow, refusing to break. "We don't push," Marcus replied, voice low and even. "We reveal. Get the proof. Let it speak." Jax joined them, unfolding a crumpled map marked with Hale's likely paths. Whispers from club contacts painted a picture. Falsified records, kickbacks from suppliers, patients turned away to cut costs. It wasn't just Elena's ordeal. It was a web ensnaring the vulnerable, the kind of moral rot that demanded exposure. The diner door jingled as a patrol car pulled up outside, its lights off, but presence heavy. The officer stepped in, badge glinting under the fluorescence, a young guy with a fresh uniform, eyes darting to the cluster of leather vests. "Morning, folks. Routine check." Heard about some bikes causing a stir near the hospital. Tension rippled through the group, hands instinctively stilling near pockets. Marcus met the man's gaze steadily, no defiance, just the quiet authority of a man who'd stared down worse. Just grabbing coffee, officer. Long night. The cop lingered, radio crackling with dispatch chatter, but something in Marcus's unflinching calm, perhaps the faint respect in Tommy's nod, eased the moment. "Drive safe," the officer muttered, retreating to his cruiser. As the Vipers rolled out again, the sun climbed higher, burning off the last mist. Hale's trail led to the Lake District, a sprawl of manicured lots hiding unkempt secrets. Marcus throttled harder, the wind whipping at his vest, carrying the promise like a banner, redemption through truth, loyalty as the ultimate weapon. Elena waited back at the hospital, tending to a child with fevered eyes, her thoughts on the man who'd vowed to shield her world. But in the distance, Hale's cabin loomed through the trees, its windows dark against the brightening day. A confrontation brewing not in shouts, but in the unyielding light of justice. Jax spotted the sedan first, tucked behind a row of pines, steam rising from the hood like a confession. The Vipers encircled quietly, engines silent now, the crunch of leaves under boots the only sound. Marcus approached the door, fist raised but not yet knocking, heart steady with the weight of oaths old and new. Inside, Hale paced, phone to ear, bartering favors in hushed tones. He had no inkling of the chosen family at his threshold, ready to unravel his empire with the quiet force of honor unbroken. The door creaked open under Marcus's touch, and in that suspended breath, the moral storm broke, promises colliding with corruption in a symphony of reckoning. The cabin's wooden door gave way with a reluctant groan, hinges protesting like old bones under strain. Sunlight slanted through the pines, dappling the threshold in shifting patterns of gold and shadow, as Marcus Kane stepped inside. The air inside was stale, thick with the scent of aged oak and the faint, metallic bite of fear sweat. Victor Hale froze mid-stride, phone slipping from his fingers to clatter against the hardwood floor. His tailored shirt hung rumpled now, sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms veined with tension, eyes widening at the intrusion. Not from one man, but the silent phalanx of leather-clad figures filling the doorway behind Marcus. "What the hell is this?" Hale's voice cracked, a far cry from the boardroom bark that had cowed so many. He backed toward the stone fireplace, where embers from a morning fire smoldered faintly, casting erratic flickers across framed photos of handshakes with suited dignitaries. The room was a facade of rustic luxury. Leather armchairs, a polished bar cart stocked with crystal decanters, all hiding the undercurrent of isolation. Outside, the lake lapped gently at the shore, a serene counterpoint to the storm brewing within these walls. Marcus raised a hand, palm out, signaling the Vipers to hold. Jax loomed in the frame like a sentinel, his broad chest rising and falling with controlled breaths, while Tommy and the others fanned out along the porch, eyes scanning for any sign of Hale's reinforcements. This wasn't a raid, it was a revelation, guided by the promise that had pulled Marcus from the wreckage of his past, a vow to his lost brothers under a merciless sun, extended now to the woman who mended his soul. Elena's face lingered in his thoughts, her quiet strength in the hospital's underbelly fueling this moment. "Mr. Hale," Marcus said, his tone even, gravelly from years of wind-whipped roads. "We need to talk, about last night, about the hospital." Hale's gaze darted to the window, where the bikes gleamed like dormant beasts under the climbing sun. Recognition dawned slowly, pieced together from the nurse's unyielding stare and the whispers of a town that knew the Iron Viper's reach. You're one of them. Her husband." He laughed, a brittle sound that echoed off the rafters, but it held no mirth, only the desperation of a man cornered by his own shadows. "This is trespassing. I'll have you arrested, all of you." I own half the council in this town." Jack stepped forward, his boots thudding softly on the floorboards, but Marcus shot him a glance that halted him. No fists, no fury. The club's code demanded truth as the blade, sharp and unyielding. Marcus pulled a folded paper from his vest pocket, printouts from a club contact, a former accountant who'd traded silence for a clean conscience after Hale's donations dried up. Owns, huh? Funny how that ownership looks when you peel back the layers. He unfolded the sheets, laying them on the coffee table with deliberate care, the paper crinkling like a verdict. Figures danced in black ink, diverted funds from patient care, kickbacks to suppliers for subpar gear, complaints buried under falsified reports. Shortages that left kids waiting for meds, nurses like Elena pulling double shifts because you cut corners to line your pockets. Hale's face paled, the color draining like water from a cracked basin. He snatched the papers, scanning them with trembling hands, the lake's breeze whispering through an open pane, like a ghost of accountability. Memories flooded him unbidden, his rise from a hungry intern to this throne of compromise, each deal a step away from the man he'd sworn to be. But greed had roots deeper than regret, twisting through boardroom nods and late-night transfers. "This is fabricated. Lies from disgruntled employees." Yet his voice wavered, eyes flicking to the door, as if escape lay beyond the Viper's watchful line. Outside, the group maintained their vigil, the air humming with the faint buzz of insects over the water. Tommy leaned against a post, his limp forgotten in the focus of purpose, while another Viper, lean and scarred from desert patrols, murmured into a radio. Back at the hospital, Elena moved through her rounds, checking charts with a steady hand, the ache in her arm a fading echo. Clara joined her at the station, pouring coffee that steamed like morning mist. "Heard your boys are closing in," Clara said softly, her grey eyes warm with the solidarity of shared battles. "Hale's always thought he was untouchable. But family's thicker than blood, isn't it?" Elena nodded, the ring on her finger a talisman against the doubt. Marcus had promised her a life beyond the club's shadows, but moments like this reminded her why they'd chosen each other. Redemption not in isolation, but in standing firm. "Thicker," she agreed, the word carrying the weight of their quiet vows, forged in the roar of engines and the hush of healed wounds. Inside the cabin, Marcus pressed on, his presence filling the space like the low rumble of an idling bike. "We didn't come for blood, Hale. We came for the truth. Elena's not the first you've pushed around. Staff whispers, patients turned away, but she's mine, and that makes this personal." He leaned in slightly, not threatening, but close enough for Hale to see the scars etching his knuckles, badges from battles where loyalty outlasted lead. "The board gets these tomorrow, clean, or we let the light in ourselves. Your call." Hale sank into an armchair, the leather sighing under him, defeat etching lines deeper than any boardroom stress. The phone on the floor buzzed ignored, a lifeline to allies who might falter under scrutiny. In that suspended quiet, the moral scales tipped, not with a crash, but a subtle shift, the promise of justice whispering through the pines. Marcus turned toward the door, the Vipers falling in behind him like shadows reclaiming the day. Hale's empire teetered, not from force, but from the unbreaking chain of honor that bound the riders. As engines stirred to life outside, the lake reflected their departure in rippling silver, a mirror to the redemption unfolding, one truth at a time. The convoy pulled away slowly, dust motes dancing in the sunlight, leaving Hale to his unraveling solitude. But whispers of deeper webs lingered, connections that stretched beyond one man's greed into the heart of the city's underbelly. Marcus throttled his bike, the wind carrying the scent of pine and possibility, eyes fixed on the road ahead. The promise endured, a beacon against corruption's tide, drawing them toward trials yet unseen. If you're finding this story gripping, hit that like button. It helps spread these tales of loyalty and justice far and wide. The sun hung high now, a relentless orb baking the asphalt as the iron vipers carved through the winding back roads toward town. Marcus Kane led the pack, his Harley's rumble a steady undercurrent to the thoughts churning in his mind. The cabin confrontation lingered like the faint scent of pine sap on his vest. Hale's defeat, etched in the way his shoulders had slumped, the papers trembling in his grasp. But victory felt hollow, incomplete, as if the web of corruption Hale represented stretched further, its threads invisible yet taut. Elena's text buzzed in his pocket. Shifts covered. Be safe. Simple words, laced with the quiet trust that anchored him. A reminder of the promise whispered in the dim light of their wedding night, to shield each other from the world's sharp edges. Jax pulled alongside at a stoplight, the red glow reflecting off his mirrored shades. Hale's cracking, but he's not done. That phone call he was on sounded like damage control to someone bigger. Marcus nodded, the engine's vibration humming through his gloves. The vipers had peeled back one layer, exposing the skimmed funds and buried complaints. But Jax's instincts, honed from years dodging IEDs in sun-scorched valleys, sensed deeper rot. Councilman Reyes, Hale's whispered ally, loomed in the shadows, a figure whose campaigns thrived on donations that masked favors. The club's code demanded they press on, not with vengeance, but with the steady light of truth, honoring the oath that bound them. Protect the overlooked, dismantle the unjust. The convoy veered into the industrial district, warehouses rising like rusted monoliths under the midday haze. Steam hissed from cooling towers, carrying the acrid tang of metal and oil that clung to the air like regret. Tommy, riding point on the flank, signaled a slowdown near a chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. Beyond it lay Reyes's campaign office, a squat brick building disguised as community outreach, but known in hushed tones as a hub for backroom deals. Hale's sedan was parked out front, its black paint dulled by dust, engine ticking as it cooled. Marcus killed his bike first, the silence amplifying the distant clank of machinery and the faint murmur of voices inside. They moved as one, boots scuffing gravel in a disciplined cadence, vests catching the sun in glints of worn leather. Jax cracked the gate's lock with a tool from his saddlebag. A quiet entry, no alarms raised. The office door loomed, frosted glass etched with "Reyes for Progress," a slogan that rang false against the undercurrent of compromise. Marcus paused, hand on the knob, the cool metal grounding him. Inside, he could hear Hale's voice, edged with desperation. "We need to bury this. The bikers, they're digging. Get the police chief on it. Say they're harassing." A deeper timbre responded. Reyes, smooth as polished stone. "Calm down, Victor. I've got strings to pull, but if this blows, you're the face they see." Pushing the door open, Marcus stepped into the dim reception area. The air thick with the stale aroma of printer ink and cheap air freshener. Hale whirled from the desk, his face a mask of ashen shock, while Reyes rose slowly from a leather chair, his suit impeccable, eyes narrowing behind wire-rimmed glasses. The room froze, papers scattered like fallen leaves across the oak surface, a laptop screen glowing with spreadsheets that screamed evasion, transfers from hospital accounts to shadowy PACs. "You again!" Hale spat, but his bluster faltered, gaze flicking to the vipers filling the doorway like a tide of resolve. Reyes recovered first, straightening his tie with feigned composure. "Gentlemen, this is a private meeting. I suggest you leave before things get official." But Marcus held up the same folder from the cabin, now bolstered with fresh printouts from a Viper contact, a whistleblower nurse who'd slipped digital copies of Hale's emails. Official, that's rich, coming from a man who turns blind eyes for cash. He slid the folder across the desk, the pages fanning out to reveal timelines, dates when patient supplies vanished, coinciding with Reyes's community grants. The councilman's face tightened, a flicker of calculation crossing his features. The same look Marcus had seen in warlords bargaining over borders, greed masked as governance. Jax loomed silently, his presence a wall of quiet menace, while Tommy scanned the room, noting the hidden safe behind a bookshelf, its dial glinting like a guilty secret. Outside, the other Vipers formed a loose perimeter, engines off but ready, the sun casting long shadows that danced with the heat waves. This wasn't about intimidation, it was the moral crossroads Hale and Reyes had evaded for too long. Marcus leaned on the desk, his voice low, carrying the weight of desert winds and lost brothers. Elena's just one. How many others? Families waiting in halls because beds were cut for your profits? The promise we keep, it's for them. Hand over the records, clean, and walk away with what's left of your dignity. Hale collapsed into a chair, rubbing his temples, the fight draining like sand through fingers. Reyes paced, phone in hand, but the signal bars mocked him. Jax had jammed it with a small device from his pocket, a trick from old ops. Doubt crept in, the room's air growing heavier, laced with the faint ozone of an approaching storm. Memories surfaced for Reyes unbidden, a younger self, campaigning on justice, now twisted into this. You think exposing us changes anything? The system's built on this. But Marcus's gaze held steady, scarred hands open, not for a fight, but for the truth's quiet demand. It changes for the ones it breaks, that's enough. The councilman hesitated, the laptop's glow illuminating his wavering resolve. In that charged pause, a siren wailed distantly, perhaps a routine patrol, or Hale's earlier call bearing fruit. Jax tensed, but Marcus signaled calm. Back at the hospital, Elena paused mid-rounds, the child's fever breaking under her care. A small victory amid the larger storm. Clara handed her a fresh chart, their eyes meeting in silent solidarity, the chosen family extending beyond leather and engines, woven from shared stands against the dark. Reyes's shoulders sagged, the phone clattering to the desk. Fine, the drive, it's got everything. He ejected a USB, sliding it across with trembling precision. Hale stared at the floor, defeated as Marcus pocketed the device, the weight of evidence like a talisman. No blows exchanged, no shouts, just the subtle shift of justice tilting toward light. The Vipers withdrew as sirens grew nearer, mounting up with the precision of a retreating tide. Engines roared to life, the convoy peeling away into the sun-drenched streets, leaving the office in stunned silence. Miles out, Marcus throttled harder, the wind whipping clarity into his thoughts. The drive held keys to redemption, not just for Elena's bruise-faded arm, but for the hospital's weary halls, the patient's quiet pleas. Yet the sirens trailed faintly, a reminder that corruption's roots ran deep, promising one final stand. Jax radioed ahead. Board meetings in an hour. We deliver this, it ends. Dine, Marcus nodded to the horizon. The promise burning brighter, loyalty's fire against the gathering dusk, forging paths where honor led the way. The midday sun beat down on the hospital's boardroom like a judge's gavel, its rays filtering through half-drawn blinds to stripe the polished oak table in stark contrasts of light and shadow. Marcus Kane stood at the threshold, the USB drive heavy in his vest pocket, a talisman forged from the morning's quiet conquests. The Iron Vipers had dispersed strategically, Jax and a few others lingering in the parking lot, engines idling like watchful guardians, while Tommy coordinated with contacts to ensure no interference from Hale's fraying network. Sirens had faded into the city's hum, a bluff called by the evidence's weight, but tension hummed in the air, thick as the scent of fresh coffee from the sideboard, and the faint, underlying tang of polished desperation. Inside, the board members shifted in their leather seats, a circle of grey suits and stern faces, murmuring over agendas that masked deeper unease. Victor Hale sat at the head, his tie askew, eyes darting like a cornered animal's as Marcus entered unannounced. The door clicked shut behind him, the sound echoing with finality, while Clara and Elena waited in the adjacent lounge, their presence a silent anchor. Elena's hand resting on a chart, steady despite the pulse of anticipation. Reyes's confession had cracked the facade. The USB held ledgers of diverted funds, emails trading patient care for political favors, a ledger of moral bankruptcy laid bare. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus began, his voice a low rumble that cut through the room's polished hush, carrying the grit of desert winds and road-worn resolve. He wasn't here as an intruder, but as the embodiment of a promise older than these walls, a vow to his fallen brothers, extended to the woman whose quiet courage lit his path. He placed the drive on the table with deliberate care, its black casing glinting like obsidian under the fluorescence. "I'm Marcus Kane, husband to nurse Elena Ramirez, and this is the truth you've been too busy to see." Hale bolted upright, chair scraping harshly against the tile, his face flushed with the remnants of authority. "This is outrageous! Security!" But his words faltered as Jax appeared in the doorway, a mountain of leather and loyalty, arms crossed to block any hasty retreat. The board chairman, a silver-haired woman with sharp eyes named Lydia Grant, rapped her pen against her notepad. "Sit down, Victor. We've heard rumors. Let's hear the man out." Her tone held the weariness of one who'd overlooked signs for too long, now stirred by the undercurrent of justice rippling through the hospital's veins. Marcus activated the projector with a nod from Clara, who slipped in the drive. Images bloomed on the screen, spreadsheets of siphoned supplies, timelines linking Hale's efficiencies to Reyes's campaigns, patient logs showing delays that bordered on neglect. The room fell silent, save for the soft whir of the machine and the distant murmur of a gurney rolling in the hall. One board member, a retired doctor with wire-rimmed glasses, leaned forward, his face paling at entries detailing substandard equipment that had risked lives. This explains the complaints we've buried." God. The children in pediatrics, wait times doubled last quarter. Hale's protests crumbled into sputters, his hands gripping the table's edge as if it could anchor his sinking empire. Memories assailed him, the intern he'd been, idealistic and fierce, now drowned in the greed that had promised security but delivered isolation. "It's not that simple," he muttered, but the words rang hollow, echoing the basement's shadows where he'd crossed into cruelty. Marcus met his gaze, not with anger, but the steady fire of redemption's call, the same look he'd given Elena in their stolen moments, vowing to build rather than break. "It is that simple, Hale. You chose power over people. Elena chose healing, even when it meant standing alone. Now choose right." Elena entered then, her scrubs crisp despite the night's toll, the faint shadow of a bruise hidden but not forgotten. She stood beside Marcus, their hands brushing in a fleeting touch that spoke of chosen bonds stronger than blood. The board's eyes softened at her presence, the nurse who'd mended fractures both seen and unseen, now the catalyst for this reckoning. Clara followed, placing a stack of staff petitions on the table, voices from the night shift demanding change. "We've lost too much to silence," Clara said, her voice steady as aged oak, "for the patients, for the promises we make when we pin on these badges." Lydia Grant absorbed it all, her pen scratching notes with growing resolve. Whispers circulated, calls to auditors, legal counsel, even the state's oversight board. Hale slumped, the fight ebbing like tide from shore, as Reyes's name surfaced in the files, his political shield fracturing under the light. No arrests in the room, no dramatic cuffs. Justice unfolded in the quiet unraveling of lies, the moral weight pressing down like the sun's unyielding gaze. Marcus watched it unfold, the scars on his knuckles, a map of battles won through loyalty, not lead. This was the promise fulfilled, not in vengeance, but in restoration, the hospital's soul reclaimed one truth at a time. As the meeting dissolved into urgent discussions, Hale was escorted out by security, his steps heavy, head bowed in the defeat of a man glimpsed his own reflection. The board voted swiftly. Immediate audits, staff reinstatements, funds redirected to care. Elena squeezed Marcus's arm, her eyes shining with the quiet victory of integrity's triumph. Outside, the Vipers revved to life, a chorus of engines celebrating not conquest, but the mending of broken oaths. Jax clapped Marcus on the back, the Brotherhood's bond reaffirmed in nods and shared glances, a family chosen in the forge of trials. The convoy rolled out under the afternoon sky, now a canvas of deepening blue, the wind carrying scents of blooming jasmine from roadside blooms, a whisper of renewal. Marcus glanced back at the hospital, its windows glowing like beacons of hope restored. Elena waved from the steps, her silhouette a pillar of strength, the ring on her finger catching the light as a vow eternal. The ride home stretched ahead, roads curving through fields where shadows lengthened, but the darkness held no terror now. Hale's fall would echo, inspiring whispers of accountability in corridors long dimmed, while Reyes faced his own unraveling, the web of corruption yielding to the light of honor. In the quiet miles, Marcus throttled steady, the engine's pulse syncing with his heartbeat. The promise that had stirred in desert nights, survived losses etched in skin and soul, now bloomed into legacy. A legacy of silent actions rippling outward, binding the vulnerable in threads of loyalty unbreakable. The Iron Vipers rode on, guardians of the overlooked, their thunder a hymn to redemption's enduring fire. And in that symphony, the world turned a fraction brighter, one moral stand at a time. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the sky in strokes of amber and rose, Marcus pulled into the clubhouse driveway, the gravel crunching under tires worn from the day's odyssey. Elena waited there, having driven ahead, her embrace warm against the cooling air. "It's over," she murmured. And in her words lay the peace of promises kept, scars healed not by time alone, but by the unyielding choice to stand for what was right. Thank you for joining us on this ride of loyalty and justice. If these stories of honor and redemption resonate with you, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We've got more tales of unbreakable promises coming your way. Your support keeps the thunder rolling.